A powerful dragon loomed over a group of adventurers who had dared to challenge it. With a single sweep of its tail, the beast crushed the battlefield, threatening to obliterate anyone in its path. Wielding 2 swords, a fierce warrior landed a blow right on the creature's snout. Next, an adventurer unleashed a bolt of lightning magic from his blade. The dragon countered with a freezing spell that shot straight toward the group, but a human sorceress quickly conjured Proscia, a magical shield that protected her allies from harm. The pressure, however, was so intense that the barrier shattered, leaving the adventurers exposed. When the healer was injured, one of her companions quickly administered a potion, bringing her back into the fight. Taking advantage of the chaos, a cunning man used a sly maneuver to slash the dragon's eye, sending the beast into a blind rage. The dual-bladed warrior used her agility to deflect the crackling red beams away from her teammates, while the frontline fighter barked at his allies not to lose heart. After all, they were the Silver Wing, the strongest party in the world. In the next scene, a round table is crowded with high-level adventurers, gathered for an emergency meeting. Vigo, level 99, points the finger at Dennis for their latest failed mission, blaming him for using the voice of dread, which supposedly scared off the cave dragon and cost them the victory. Dennis fires back, reminding everyone it was Captain Vigo himself who ordered him to use that ability. The leader, of course, denies ever giving such an order. Frustrated, Dennis drifts into his own memory of the battle. Their mission was to defeat the cave dragon and recover its rare materials, but when the beast went berserk, winning became impossible. That's when the captain demanded Dennis use the voice of dread, and with that burst of intimidation, the cave dragon panicked and ran. The mission was a bust. Even so, Dennis knows that if they'd pressed on, plenty of them would have died. Still, Vigo insists he'd never give such an order, and accuses Dennis of plotting to smear the group's reputation like he's some kind of spy from a rival team. With that unfounded suspicion, the captain condemns Dennis to expulsion. Seeing that none of his other teammates speak up, Dennis realizes they all agree. Vigo sneers that a mere cook like Dennis never deserved to be in the group anyway. And that's enough to make Dennis rise from his seat and unleash a surge of power in front of the leader. Vigo doesn't back down. In his mind, Silver Wing is only for the most qualified warriors, and even if Dennis is level 99, he's still just a cook. So, with all that said, Dennis backs off, accepts his expulsion, and leaves without another word. A few days later, Dennis is packing up to leave the capital when a little girl bumps into him and accidentally lets go of her balloon. She's crushed it was a gift from her mother. So Dennis leaps up onto the fountain obelisk in the square and grabs the balloon, returning it to her and lighting up her world. Before watching her run back to her mom, he tells her, "If something matters to you, don't let it slip away so easily." Watching his former teammate from a high window, Vigo decides it's finally time to set his plan into motion. Back to Dennis, as he's leaving through the city gates. He's stopped by a former party member, Katie, the dual-bladed warrior. She rushes after him, desperate to understand why he was kicked out. According to her, if Dennis leaves, nobody will be able to make those secret potions or whip up the delicious food only he knows how to cook. Dennis shrugs it off, insisting they'll find someone better. But Katie is adamant since Dennis joined. Their dungeon runs have skyrocketed in efficiency. And that's the real reason Silver Wing now sits atop the adventurer rankings. It's not his fault the others don't recognize what he brings to the table. And if he insists on leaving for good, she at least wants him to cook dinner and prep some meals to tide them over. Dennis complains that all she thinks about is food, but Katie grows serious and asks what he'll do next. He says he's opening a restaurant he's finally going to cook for real. Katie's crushed. After all, she was the one who invited Dennis to join Silver Wing in the first place, and he thanks her for that. Thinking to himself, Dennis knows he and Katie have always gotten along. Vigo, on the other hand, is clearly interested in her, and that probably influenced his decision to get rid of the cook. As a last-ditch effort, the vice captain orders Dennis to return to the team right now. But even without a response, Dennis knows his adventuring days are over. On the bright side, his new life as a chef is just beginning. Without wasting time, he heads to another city and is instantly captivated by a state-of-the-art refrigerator in the marketplace, an absolute must-have for any real restaurant. He's dying to take it home, but first checks his guide for ex-adventurers on how to open a restaurant, making sure it's really a necessary expense. According to the book, the best approach is to minimize costs wherever possible. That convinces Dennis to skip the purchase for now and rely on his ice magic instead. Leaving the shop, the would-be entrepreneur decides to follow his guide step by step, getting pumped about launching his new business. Circling the marketplace, he keeps these tips in mind, Buy a cheap, abandoned building and renovate it. Build good relationships with your suppliers. After a long afternoon of shopping and research, Dennis can feel his dream coming alive, getting closer by the minute. He's almost ready, but reading a little further in the guide, he realizes he shouldn't try to do everything alone. Cooking is crucial, but customers matter just as much. So Dennis decides it's time to hire someone. In the middle of all this, he notices a man out on the street, drawing a crowd as he boasts about his hand-picked goods of unparalleled quality. But the star attraction is a little girl who, according to the merchant, was once the daughter of a great noble house. Her parents had lost a power struggle and been cast out. Some in the crowd wonder if the girl is truly a noble, or if that's just the merchant's ploy to drive up her price. Dennis, for his part, could only think how much he wished he could help her. But he couldn't save everyone. If he tried to right every injustice in the world, he surely wouldn't survive. Suddenly, the girl meets the cook's eyes, and in that look, he's transported back to his own childhood, when he wandered the streets alone and abandoned. An opening bid of 300,000 PIS kicks off the auction. But the price rises fast, shooting up to 800,000 in no time. The merchant is about to close the deal when Dennis speaks up, offering 1 million. But then the refrigerator vendor butts in, raising the bid to $1.5 million. He's desperate to take this cute little girl home and take good care of her. People around them whisper in concern. The octopus has offered so much for the girl, and everyone knows he's depraved. God only knows what he'd do to an innocent child. Not wanting to give up, Dennis offers 2 million, but the octopus counters with 3. The bidding war spirals higher and higher, seeming to have no end, until cut to the next scene. Dennis manages to buy the girl, trading away almost every coin he had. Still, he can't have the girl wandering around in rags, so he takes her to a shop and buys her a dress that, according to the shopkeeper, matches her hair perfectly. Later that afternoon, the two of them are walking side by side down the street. Suddenly, the girl stops in her tracks and stands still for several seconds, ignoring Dennis's calls. Without a word, she starts walking again, leaving Dennis completely at a loss for what to do with this child. As she shuffles along, head down, the girl suddenly looks up and realizes she's lost sight of her new master. In a flash, she's nearly run over by a passing cart and bumps into a rough-looking man. Moments later, she does the same to an elderly lady who snaps at her with open disdain. Each encounter makes the child feel as if she's trapped in a living nightmare surrounded by hostile strangers, a helpless creature among wolves. That's when Dennis finds her and confesses how worried he was, apologizing for walking too fast. Back at the house Dennis had just purchased, the girl asks why he bought her. Dennis scratches his head, explaining that she reminded him of something from long ago. He asks what he should call her, and she replies, slave, not liking that one bit. Dennis insists on calling her Atelier. He introduces himself, full of enthusiasm. She asks what she's supposed to do, and Dennis tells her she doesn't have to do anything. She can use the upstairs however she likes, or she's free to leave if she wants. After all, from this moment on, she's a free person. Later, the cook does what he does best, prepares a meal fit for his new housemate. While he's working in the kitchen, the girl remains quiet and withdrawn. Besides being a talented cook, Dennis also uses a bit of magic to enhance the meal, giving it a special touch. It's this bit of magic that finally makes Atelier's eyes light up for the first time since she arrived. The aroma so enchanting she feels like she's floating on air. When she opens her eyes again, a beautiful plate of food sits before her. Dennis sits beside her, and the two of them give thanks for the meal. The girl takes her first bite and instantly falls in love with the flavor, eating as if she can't get enough. Once she's stuffed, Atelier suddenly bursts into tears. Watching her, Dennis realizes he can't imagine what this girl has been through. He decides not to push her with any questions. If she wants to talk, she will, even if she's been hurt so deeply she thinks there's no hope left in the world. At least she'll have food to eat here. At one point, Dennis asks if Atelier liked the food, and she realizes she's got a mountain of rice stuck in her throat, prompting Dennis to come to her rescue once again. Over the next few days, Atelier gets used to the rhythms of daily life, pitching in around the house with cleaning and chores. Before long, she and Dennis are inseparable, sharing every little moment. One day, after finally finishing the restaurant's steaker, Dennis celebrates with a fist bump. Atelier hesitates, but when she finally returns the gesture, she feels, for the first time, a sense of belonging and camaraderie with this young man who's done so much for her. And so, at last, the Adventurers Restaurant opens its doors, and Dennis wants Atelier to be the poster girl for the place. With everything decided, The owner takes one last look around. The menu's ready. The water's out, tables and chairs are set. The ingredients and kitchen tools are all in their place. Everything's perfect. Nothing can stop this venture now. Fired up, Dennis promises himself that the very first customer will fall in love with his cooking, so much that they'll need to eat there 3 times a day. Well, as long as they pay, of course, because Dennis is dead broke and can't afford to give anyone free meals. Finally, the restaurant door swings open, and a knight in full armor stands silently in the entrance. Recalling page 28 of his guide, Dennis remembered that some customers just want to be left alone, preferring not to be bothered. So, even if this guy was armed to the teeth, the chef had to keep a friendly distance so as not to make things awkward. As the customer took a seat at the counter, the restaurant owner asked Aetlier to fetch a glass of water. Dennis, keeping a close eye on the man, waited eagerly to see what he'd order. After all, this was his very first customer, and it had to be special. Instead of speaking, the customer simply pointed to a small portion of rice and a side of crystallized pickled plums on the menu. Honestly, Dennis was a bit let down. He'd imagined a warrior like this would go for a hearty meal to recover from some epic battle. Thinking out loud, he asked if the customer was the type to eat like a bird, and the guy shook his head. Dennis then asked if he was short on cash, and the warrior's reaction made it clear that was exactly the case. So, Dennis decided to ignore the modest order and whipped up a massive bowl of Britora, wanting to treat his first customer right. Quickly, the customer made it clear in a distinctly feminine voice that she couldn't pay for the meal. That's when Dennis realized his customer was actually a woman. At that point, she had nothing left to hide. She took off her helmet and revealed who she really was. She explained, somewhat dejectedly, that she'd been kicked out of her adventuring party just for being a girl. A cruel twist, considering gender shouldn't matter when it comes to skill in battle. Her level wasn't that high, but probably around 23, which was respectable enough. Dennis agreed about the gender issue and thought she was mature enough at that level anyway. All fired up, the adventurer went on about the vice captain of the strongest group out there, the Silver Wing, a female swordswoman known as Crimson Lightning, whose opening attack was always a critical hit. Clearly, a legendary warrior in her own right. Dennis knew all about her. He even muttered under his breath that she could be pretty ruthless sometimes, not catching what he said. The adventurer explained that she was hiding her gender to get into another party, but it was tough, since she couldn't even speak without giving herself away. Things had gotten tight, she was running out of money and losing hope. Seeing this, Dennis set down the very first meal for his very first customer, hoping to lift her spirits. The girl was mesmerized by the dish's mouth-watering appearance. She reminded him she couldn't pay, but Dennis waved it off, telling her to eat before it got cold. With that, she dug in, and with every bite, she seemed transported. When she finally finished, Dennis, delighted with how happy she looked, invited her to come back anytime. But as she'd already said, she couldn't afford daily meals at a restaurant. So Dennis made her a promise. He'd spread the word that a female swordswoman was looking for a team, and, in the meantime, she could eat there for free until she found a job. The offer left her speechless. After serving his very first customer, word got out, and more people started coming in, falling in love with Dennis's cooking. Whether it was his fried rice or the wyvern pasta he made for a group of men who stopped by, they said the food was top-notch, and the poster girl was the cutest thing ever. Dennis laughed and told Aetlier people were praising her, but she just stayed quiet, as if none of it concerned her, a reminder that her past had made her a lot tougher. Even an elderly couple praised her service, but Aetlier still didn't know how to respond. When one of the men's group remarked that this was the perfect meal before heading off to explore a dungeon, Dennis realized they were adventurers, too. He asked if they'd be interested in adding a female swordswoman to their team. One of them said she could join them the very next day. They were actually looking for someone with more firepower. Later that afternoon, when the girl returned to the restaurant, she was amazed that Dennis had found her a new party so quickly. She promised she'd pay him back every cent from her first paycheck, even though he'd arranged it. Dennis told her to be careful, he didn't know those guys, but she was too excited to worry. Soon after, Dennis finished preparing her basilisk oyakodon, and she polished off the plate in no time, vowing, mouth still full, to pay him back for every last bite of that divine meal. Dennis asked her not to talk with her mouth full, so she mumbled, with her mouth still full, how delicious the food was. After her meal, Dennis's first customer left, but she definitely wasn't the last. As the days went by, more and more people discovered Dennis's restaurant and his uncanny talent for unique dishes. One night, after closing time with no customers left except for them, 2 girls stopped by and were just as captivated by the food. As he was getting ready to close up, Dennis asked Aetlier to go fetch the store curtain for him. Meanwhile, listening in on their conversation, Dennis overheard the blonde girl telling her friend that lately, some adventuring groups had been inviting women to join them only to do terrible things to them deep in the dungeons. They'd take the women so far in that they couldn't find their way back, then abandon them after assaulting them. After pulling this a few times, these adventurers would move on to another city and repeat the cycle. Hearing all this, Dennis wondered if those criminals might have been the guys who came to his restaurant. The next day, the heavy armored swordswoman introduced herself to her new teammates as Henrietta. Across from her stood a brown-haired guy named Still a Light Swordsman. To her right, wearing an earring and a high collar, was Marmok, the healer. The red-haired archer was Handok, and the hooded mage was Kalatoba. Technically, Still was the leader, but since they didn't have an official hierarchy, Henrietta could just relax. Soon enough, the group heads out on their first mission with a new member. According to Still, today's job will just be a simple gathering run inside a dungeon. Henrietta asks what exactly they'll be collecting, but the leader says they'll talk about it once they get there, that it's nothing major. With an awkward smile, she thinks to herself that she really just wanted to know before arriving. But she's too worried about making things weird, so she keeps quiet until the team finally reaches the cave. Once inside, Henrietta quickly proves she's anything but ordinary. With every enemy that appears, she takes them down in a new and creative way. Her teammates watch in awe, clapping and praising the new recruit's performance, words that go straight to her head after the brutal way she was kicked out of her last group. Still, they say it's time to go even deeper. And for the first time, Henrietta feels like people are genuinely counting on her. After all, she's always been treated as the weak link just because she's a woman, or the protected one who never really gets to fight. Now that things are different, Henrietta swears she'll give it everything she's got. One way or another, the party presses on, delving into the most dangerous parts of the dungeon until a silver golem appears. Henrietta doesn't hesitate for a second. She meets it head-on and slices off one of its arms in a single strike. Next, they face off against a massive worm deep within the cave, and Henrietta makes quick work of it, taking off its head without breaking a sweat. With each new stage, Henrietta becomes more and more determined to prove she's a worthy part of the team. But all that drive eventually comes with a price. After so much fighting, Henrietta is finally exhausted. Even then, her teammates barely seem to notice, insisting they're almost at their final destination. Left with no choice, she pushes herself onward, not even given a moment to rest her legs. Finally, they reach a certain part of the labyrinth. Still explains that the glowing blue-green crystals scattered around are called memory crystals, and that's what they came here to collect. Henrietta, barely hanging on, nearly collapses on the spot, so the leader tells Marmok to cast a healing spell on her. Instead, Marmok casts a spell that restricts her movements even more. Struggling, Henrietta tries to grab her sword, but Still steps on her hand and kicks the weapon away. Now, with her body reeling from the stun effect, Henrietta is easy prey for the gang of criminals. Planting his foot on her, the team leader mocks how easy she was to fool with just a bit of sweet talk. According to him, swordswomen are always the best targets. They're not as clever as mages or sages, and they usually have the nicest bodies. The plan is to have their fun with the pretty one for an hour, and then let her go. Marmok even admits he's going to stun her again afterward. But if she gives in, maybe she'll make it out of this. Hearing all this, Henrietta can only regret not listening to Dennis. If she'd just paid more attention, she would have known something was wrong from the start. With that, the criminals start removing her armor, but suddenly, the sound of battle echoes through the cave. They panic, worried there's another party nearby. Still tells Handok to check it out, but the leader is immediately knocked aside by a blow that sends him flying. The source of the chaos steps forward wearing a bag over their head and wielding 2 kitchen knives. The sheer fury makes the adventurers think a monster has come for them. Quickly, Still orders Marmok to use a detection spell to find the intruder's weakness. But the spell is useless against such a terrifying opponent. In a flash, the stranger attacks Still. Even though he blocks with his sword, he's hurled against the cave wall with bone-crushing force, as Henrietta lies helpless on the cold dungeon floor. The masked figure absolutely wrecks the criminals. Watching through blurry eyes, Henrietta thinks the person moves just like a master chef, but she passes out before she can make sense of it all. In the next scene, as night falls, Henrietta recounts what happened the day before. When she woke up, she was lying in the Adventurers Guild waiting room, unable to thank the mysterious, muscular man with the kitchen knives. Her attackers had been knocked out, tied up, and left at the dungeon's entrance, or so she was told. When the guild investigated, it turned out they were wanted criminals. After all she's been through, it almost feels like it was all just a bad dream. Still, it's clear to Henrietta she needs to be much more careful about who she adventures with from now on. Dennis, meanwhile, says it was his fault, too much to her surprise. In his view, he should have done some background checks on those guys. Embarrassed, Henrietta insists it wasn't his fault, until her stomach lets out a loud growl. Dennis asks what she wants for dinner. She remembers she's still broke. But, as always, the chef doesn't care, he just wants to see his partner with a full belly. In that case, Henrietta asks for the Supreme Hodgen steak combo. Dennis jokes that it's the most expensive dish, and when she realizes she's overstepped, she tries to order the cheapest one instead. But the chef laughs it off and tells Aetlier to close up for the night. Now that their guest ordered the biggest meal, the two of them are going to have to eat it together. Just then, those two girls from the other day come back and order a palama lasagna and a baked palama. A little while later, Dennis finishes up Henrietta's Supreme Hodgen steak and brings another portion to Aetlier, who's just as floored by the dish's sheer beauty and juiciness. The other customers ask why the chef wasn't open yesterday, so he explains he had a few things to take care of. Hearing this, Henrietta starts to get suspicious, picturing that same bag from the day before over Dennis's head, which fits just a little too perfectly. Right after, someone opens the restaurant door. With a smile, Chef Dennis welcomes the newest customer to the adventurer's restaurant. The next day, once again inside the restaurant, Henrietta tries to get the owner's attention for a chat, but he's so caught up in his work that he practically cuts her off just to ask what she'll have today. After a few seconds of thought, the knight orders the sorcerer's ramen. Only after she places her order does he show he'd actually been listening. Henrietta wanted to know if she should go back to hiding her gender for future adventures, and the cook tells her she should do things her own way because that's the only way she'll ever truly be herself. Hearing those words, Henrietta hurries to the back of the restaurant to take off all her armor. Before coming back out, she reflects that when people make mistakes, they start to fear making new ones and sometimes lose sight of who they really are. But instead of giving in to that, the girl steps out in her true outfit, allowing herself to show her real self. Seeing this, Aetlier gives her look a thumbs up, and Dennis smiles in approval. Meanwhile, someone approaches the restaurant door. Inside, the warrior enjoys every bite of her noodles, her happiness plain to see. After all, Dennis's advice had truly touched her heart. Words from a skilled chef just hit different. Speaking of which, Dennis suddenly changes his tone. Since she's managed to eat everything in sight, he wants to know if she's planning to join another group and get back to work. Henrietta tries to dodge the question, so the chef gets more direct, pressing her about the tab she owes him. Right then, a very young person walks in, takes a seat at the counter, and opens the menu, pausing his back and forth with Henrietta for a moment. The owner greets the newcomer, though he has no idea if it's a boy, a girl, or maybe both. For her part, Henrietta can only think about how beautiful the child is. Avoiding any pronouns, Dennis asks to be notified when the customer's ready to order, and the kid asks what's good to eat. Everything, Dennis replies, but the child thinks that's about the most useless answer possible. Unfazed, the chef suggests of richer katsudon, but the kid isn't in the mood for a rice bowl. Henrietta suggests pasta instead, something like a spa katsu, but the child thinks that sounds too heavy. The warrior tries offering something else, but this kid was picky as can be. Dennis loses his patience and nearly snaps at the customer, forcing Henrietta to hold him back. Aetlier, meanwhile, nudges the kid and says fried rice is the way to go in situations like this. With the choice made, Dennis sets to work with his usual cheerful flair, whipping up a meal with his signature magical touches. Soon enough, he serves up a gorgeous plate of pancake fried rice. Without hesitation, the kid grabs a shrimp from the top and instantly falls in love with the taste. Afterward, Dennis asks if there was something the kid wanted to talk about. Since they'd walked in looking like someone who needed to vent, since he brought it up, the kid confides that everyone around them is just hopeless, mentally stunted, only ever thinking about finishing whatever quest is at hand and collecting a handout for payment, with zero ambition to become a top-tier group. That's what the kid can't stand most. Those losers just pretending to be adventurers for show, which is unforgivable. The problem is, when the kid spoke this truth to their old group, they got kicked out, but that's exactly what they wanted. No way could they stay in a team of such shallow-minded people. Instead, one day they'll join the Silver Wing and become the greatest magic user there is. Not really in the mood for this conversation. Dennis just tells the egotistical kid to dial it back a little, or else risk ending up alone, because what makes a real adventurer is the group, not just individual talent. The mage agrees, as long as the group is strong enough to keep up. Lunch finished, the kid pays for the meal, says they'll leave the change even though they'd already paid the exact amount. Before leaving, they introduce themselves as Vivia Strange, making it clear they'll return for more of that shrimp fried rice. Sure enough, the next day Vivia is back, waiting as the chef fries up shrimp for lunch. This time, Vivia shares they've decided to join the area's strongest group, the Night Mist Troop. After all, when you're as strong as Vivia, you end up being pretty populous. Dennis corrects him. Popular is the word he meant, and asks if the team's really up to Vivia's level. Vivia isn't sure, but trusts in their own skills and is sure they just need the chance to show what they can do. Dennis notes this kid really has some spirit, while Vivia eagerly looks forward to the day they finally join the Silver Wing. Soon the meal is served, and once again enchanted by the food, the short little mage wonders aloud if he'll get a cool nickname when he joins the Silver Wing, something like the Dark Mage or similar. Dennis thinks to himself that it's more likely they'll call this little guy Fried Rice Boy, but even if Vivia is egocentric, the chef admires his drive to get better, as long as he finds a reliable team to grow alongside. Someday this kid will make a trustworthy adventurer. Dennis asks when his first job with the new team will be, and Vivia explains that tomorrow they'll be gathering rare synthesis materials on the 5th floor of the dungeon. A bit concerned, Dennis uses his scan ability and finds out Vivia is level 17, which is really high for someone that age, but the recommended level for entering the 5th floor is at least 30. With that in mind, Dennis asks if that's not a bit deep for him, but Vivia is sure it'll all work out, especially since the elite members will be supporting him. Hearing this, Dennis thinks the kids probably read about advanced spells and now believes he can pull them off in a real battle. According to the chef, a person's level is basically a measure of the number and quality of the skills they've acquired. The reason someone's base stats go up every time they level up is because the skills they already have get sharper, and they're almost always active. So, if Vivia really did master several advanced skills, it's strange that his level hasn't increased accordingly. With that in mind, Dennis tries to get the mage to see his own limits. But Vivia insists the chef could never understand what it's like to enter a dungeon. It's a feeling only adventurers get. But Dennis remembers all too well the last time he made it to the 37th floor. Either way, Vivia pays for his lunch and tells Dennis everything's going to be fine. He also warns, ahead of time, that next time he's ordering crab fried rice. The next day, as Dennis is walking through the street market with Aetlier, he can't help but worry about Vivia, who's probably on the 5th floor of the dungeon right now. Dennis wants to stop the kid, but he knows that in the world of adventurers, you have to take responsibility for yourself. That's just how it works. Aetlier tugs at his sleeve and says, "I hope he's okay." Suddenly, two adventurers walking by start talking. One asks if that kid, Vivia, is going to be alright. The other shrugs it off, saying that's just how they do things, and there's no point worrying at this stage, even though Captain Hopper sent the kid down to the 5th floor by himself just to see if he'd survive. In this rite of passage where most people end up dead. Hearing that, Dennis grabs both guys and drags them into a secluded alley to get some answers, thinking they're hotshots because they're members of the Night Mist Troop. The two men go on the attack, but Dennis beats the hell out of them without breaking a sweat. They don't even come close to landing a hit. Dennis heads back to Aetlier and sighs they'll have to close the restaurant again today. Understanding the situation, the girl looks him in the eye and wishes him luck. As for Vivia, he's learning the hard way that real life is nothing like what he's read in his magic books. He's running for his life, trying to shake off the monsters chasing him. Earlier, those two adventurers had left him alone as a test to see if he could join their group. Along the way, a vine suddenly springs to life and wraps around his ankle, stopping him in his tracks. Terrified, Vivia tries to remember the spell to break enchantments, but he's so scared that his mind just goes blank. For all the spells he's memorized, the young mage finds himself utterly helpless, just waiting for the goblins to catch up and finish him off. Caught in his panic, a magical chain slowly passes right through him. Moments later, the goblins reach where he's tied up, but Vivia is already gone. In fact, a girl has hidden him in a hole in the wall, letting him escape the monsters that were after him. Vivia thanks her for the rescue and is genuinely amazed that she knows a spell as ancient as dispelling magic. Even so, the girl makes it clear now's not the time to feel safe. They still need to find a way out. Her name is Cynthia, and sadly, She too was abandoned by her group after falling into a trap while running from monsters. No matter what she does, Cynthia has always felt like she's not even good enough for the basics, always causing problems for her teammates. Taking a chance, Vivia admits he won't be rescued either. And maybe he was a little too full of himself no matter what group he's in. He always stirs up trouble because of his terrible personality. The two find comfort in their similar situations, and just like that, a bond forms between them. Meanwhile, outside the restaurant, Aetlier sweeps the sidewalk. Back in the dungeon, the goblins seem to be coming back, making their usual ruckus. Faced with danger, Vivia comes up with a plan. He'll act as bait and draw the creatures away, giving Cynthia a shot at escaping. Cynthia completely disagrees, saying it makes no sense for him to sacrifice himself. But Vivia insists he wouldn't even be alive if it weren't for her. For the first time in his life, Vivia Strange is ready to die for someone else. He spent his whole life being selfish, looking down on others, thinking he was better than everyone. But Cynthia saved him and comforted him. And now, with all his heart, he just wants her to get out of this alive. Cynthia pleads with him to wait for help. But Vivia has already made up his mind to sacrifice himself to save her. So, the young mage gathers his courage and strength for the next step. He steps out of the hole in the wall and faces the goblins, determined to give it everything he's got so Cynthia has a chance. As the monsters get closer, the mage casts his spell Palm, literally a giant hand that acts as a barrier to hold back the enemies. But the goblins manage to force their way through after some effort and finally close in on him. And then, quite literally, Dennis comes crashing down on the goblins, not with a gun, but with a gigantic pan he conjured with a spell that's actually called Steel. With this huge pan, he manages to split the corridor, separating the creatures on the other side. Thinking it's another monster with a bag over its head, Vivia starts firing off a bunch of palms. But when he hears the monster's voice, he realizes it's just the chef. Dennis pulls off the bag, smacks Vivia on the head for doing something so reckless, and tells him it's time to leave. Vivia dashes off to find the friend he made in the dungeon. But when they get to the hole in the wall, they discover that Cynthia was actually just a skeleton wearing the girl's clothes all along. The next day, at the Adventurers Guild, Vivia and Dennis looked into the origins of that girl and discovered her name was Cynthia Dread, a 16-year-old mage who got separated from her party on the 5th floor of the dungeon 13 years ago. Because of that, they visited the adventurer's grave late in the afternoon to pay their respects. Dennis mentioned he'd heard stories like this before, where the spirits of adventurers who died in labyrinths sometimes helped people who got trapped there. As they placed flowers on the tombstone, Vivia broke down in tears and promised he'd always come back to visit his friend, and that he would become the world's #1 mage to save people like Cynthia. As they were leaving the cemetery, Dennis tried to cheer him up, promising to make him a big plate of fried rice, but Vivia was still visibly shaken by everything that had happened. So the chef gave him a hearty slap on the back and told him not to stay down for too long, or Cynthia's spirit would never be free. Annoyed, Vivia said he knew that already but just wanted to let himself be sad, at least for a little while. Suddenly, he felt the girl's magical current flow through him once again. Vivia thought to himself that, in the old days, whenever people experienced something mysterious, they called it magic, and if that was true, then Cynthia Dread was certainly a mage. Meanwhile, at the city's bell tower, a girl stood at the edge, about to fall, wondering, why did things have to end up like this? Late that afternoon, a man called out to Bokkel, wanting to know when she'd finally fix the reports she was supposed to turn in. Head down, the little girl just muttered an apology. But of course, that wasn't enough for him. Meanwhile, the other guys in the room just laughed and made fun of her, as Bokkel tried to explain that the numbers for the mission reward payouts didn't add up. Hearing this, her boss smacked her on the head with the stack of papers and told her she'd better redo everything until it matched up, doubting that she was really level 32 at all. Because of that scolding, Bokkel was stuck at work long after everyone else had left. Trying to straighten things out, she noticed that the number of collected items was off, which was why the reward calculations didn't match up. In her mind, it had to be someone who'd been there longer than her making these mistakes, but she was still the one stuck fixing them. On top of all that, she had to get up at 3 in the morning for a dawn mission, and she hadn't had a bite to eat all day, not lunch, not dinner. She was absolutely starving, even though she doubted any restaurants would still be open. Her hunger was so intense that she decided to take a chance and check if a new place she'd heard about might still be serving. When she got there, Aetlier was just packing things up to close, and for a second, Bokkel felt her hopes sink. But then Aetlier asked if she was a customer, giving the girl a chance to slip in at the last minute. Not only that, but the staff member asked Dennis to take care of just one more order for the night. Dennis wasn't thrilled about it, but Henrietta and Vivia chimed in too, convincing the chef to whip something up for the girl. Embarrassed, Bockel sat at the counter and, after glancing at the menu, ordered the daily special. While Vivia chatted to Henrietta about cutting her bangs, Bockel found herself soaking in the cozy atmosphere. It made her heart feel lighter. The truth was, she usually spent her rare days off sleeping, with no friends to hang out with, and she realized it'd be nice to come to a warm place like this more often. After a while, Dennis brought out the special, and the new customer stared at the fried food and the unfamiliar sauce. She'd never seen anything like it. The moment she tasted it, Bockel was blown away by what the chef could do. Honestly, she'd never eaten anything so delicious in her entire life, agreeing that this place was a total gem. Henrietta rattled off another 15 dishes for her to try, like Vritra's katsudon or the magic ramen. Vivia joked that her friend had already tried everything in this dump, to which she replied that, well, what else do you expect from the restaurant's first customer? First freeloader, you mean? Chef Dennis shot back. I let you run a tab and you took full advantage. Time to get a job already. Henrietta grumbled, but Vivia was unemployed too. But the chef pointed out that the mage at least paid for his meals with his savings, earning himself the title of traitor from Henrietta. At that, Bockel burst out laughing so hard she started to cry, and everyone turned to look at her. After all, there really was a place in the world filled with good food and good people, but every day she was stuck at a job where everyone hated her for no reason, and she had to work late into the night. Honestly, Bockel woke up every morning wishing she could just disappear, though it hadn't always been that way. When she was younger, people saw her as a promising mage, praised by everyone in her community. She was so talented that when she came of age, the whole village pooled their resources to sponsor her studies in the big city, hoping she'd become a full-fledged sorceress. Things started off well enough right away. Bockel skipped ahead a grade because of her remarkable abilities, and she was even offered a spot as a faculty member, a teacher. She brimmed with confidence and planned to join the city's strongest adventurer guild to earn money and give back to those who'd supported her. With that memory lingering in her mind, Bockel left the restaurant after only a single bite of her food. Everyone inside worried about her, and Vivia mentioned she was part of the Night Mist troupe, the same group that had once left him for dead. The others quickly urged Dennis to do something, but the chef just shrugged, saying he was only a cook. All he could do was feed people. Bockel, it seemed, would have to help herself. At 3 in the morning, her alarm went off. It was time to get ready for her mission, though she hadn't managed to sleep at all. Exhausted, she dozed off for just a moment and ended up running late. In a rush, she grabbed her things and hurried down to meet her teammates, who were furious about her lack of responsibility. Still, they set out for their morning dungeon mission. In the chaos, they were ambushed by a werewolf that knocked one of the team members to the ground. Bockel reacted instantly with a blast, taking down the monster. Worried, she rushed to check on her injured teammate, only to be shoved aside by the very man she'd just saved. After the mission, the young mage wandered through the city streets, weighed down by sadness. Her teammates had had the nerve to blame her for what happened to the guy in the dungeon, and they'd said awful things to her, telling her they'd all be better off if she wasn't around. Nearby, Henrietta and Vivia were walking down the street, talking about food. Henrietta rattled off every single dish on Chef Dennis's menu, while Vivia suggested she focus on more pressing things like getting a job. That's when they spotted Bockel, head down as she walked by. The next scene found Bockel at the top of the bell tower, standing at the edge, wondering how her life had come to this. Vivia and Henrietta had followed her, realizing things were much worse than they'd thought. And just as the bell began to ring, Bockel jumped. Henrietta leaped after her, grabbing hold of the girl, while Vivia cast a cushioning spell near the ground, turning their fall into a soft landing. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, Aetlier steps out of the bath and immediately complains there aren't any towels. Which means, of course, she walks out dripping wet and stark naked, leaving Dennis scrambling, desperate to find anything for the little girl to dry herself off with. Moments later, Vivia and Henrietta show up with Bockel in tow. The cook takes one look at the situation and comes to a conclusion. The little mage is dealing with an illness of the mind. The more serious it is, the more people keep their troubles to themselves and end up destroying themselves. Vivia can't help but jab that Henrietta will never suffer from anything like that. When he sees the girl actually laugh, Dennis realizes just how well those two troublemakers are already getting along. Henrietta wants to know how Bockel can be cured, and the chef explains the only real remedy is plenty of rest. Vivia isn't convinced that'll ever happen after all. Bokal is part of the Night Mist squad, so Dennis promises to have a talk with the crew. That night, he welcomes the squad's members into his restaurant. Their leader, Captain Hopper, is quick to apologize that one of his team is giving Dennis so much trouble. Dennis, for his part, insists he's the one who should be apologizing, since he knocked a few of them out at one point. Hopper brushes it off, saying he's heard the food here is supposed to be top-notch. Dennis can tell this guy isn't giving him an inch, and his skills quickly size him up. Level 51 way out of the league of any average adventurer. No wonder his squad is number 1 in the city. As for Bokal, Dennis explains she's safe and resting for now, but she's in no condition to work with the Night Mist, and should really be released from the group so she can recover. Hopper says that's easier said than done, they have custody of the girl, after all. At that, another member tosses Bokal's contract onto the table. Dennis is furious when he sees what she's signed up for. Impossible conditions and an inhuman workload, especially for someone her age. When the others mock his concern, the chef loses his cool and tells them flat out they're nothing but a gang of cruel con artists. Hearing that, Hopper crushes his mug in his hand and says this city is their turf, they're the law around here. If Dennis doesn't want any trouble, he'd better hand Bokal over now. At the same time, Bokal wakes up feeling miserable, wondering why her friends won't just let her die already. Someone like her would be better off dead. Hearing this, Aetlier calmly tells her she's free to die if that's what she wants. Aetlier herself had thought about ending her life once. After all she'd lost. She'd been banished and sold as a slave. And that's when the dark thoughts started. There was nothing good in her mind back then, just pain and suffering. But Aetlier didn't die because, somehow, there were still wonderful things in life. First things first, she tells her friend, have something delicious to eat, and only then decide what you really want. If Bokal still wants to die after that, then maybe there's nothing else to be done. Either way, Aetlier will respect her choice, though she'd much rather Bokal choose to live. Outside the room, Dennis asks Hopper if he thinks he's king or something. Hopper shrugs, it's pretty much like that. In every dungeon city, the strongest group holds the real power, since nobody else can compete. Silverwing is a perfect example. Dennis points out that Hopper's bunch are nothing like them. But Hopper disagrees, it's basically the same thing. Except instead of royalty and nobles as clients, Night Mist's influence is limited to this little city. Honestly, he thinks this dump is so run down it ought to be burned to the ground. Suddenly, Katie the Crimson Lightning bursts into the restaurant. Never mind that it's closed. Dennis's old teammate is thrilled to see him after so long, and compliments the down-to-earth vibe his place has. Dennis tries to get her to come back later, since he's in the middle of something important, but Katie pouts she came all the way from the Oak House just to see him, and this is the welcome she gets. Hopper can't help but notice the crimson armor, the twin red swords, and her fiery hair, not to mention the insignia on her coat. That's when it clicks. He's looking at the vice captain of Silverwing, better known as the Crimson Swiftblade. Right then, Hopper starts getting seriously nervous about how close Katie and Dennis seem. After Dennis convinces Katie to wait a bit, he asks if there's a way to get Bokal out of the squad without causing a scene. Katie immediately interrupts again, scooping Vivia up for a hug like a little stuffed animal. Dennis has to remind her that he's a guy, while the young mage asks how she knows the chef. Katie cheerfully reveals Dennis used to be part of Silverwing, and that the two of them were basically partners, a revelation that hits the entire restaurant like a bombshell, leaving everyone stunned. Hopper's eyes go wide when he realizes where Dennis came from. He finally understands that making an enemy out of this guy is a terrible idea. On that note, he orders a subordinate to burn Bokal's contract, officially releasing her from the squad, then storms out of the place, fuming. Katie remarks that things could have gotten ugly, and Dennis is relieved it all ended without a fight. Katie, on the other hand, is furious that anyone would mess with her Dennis, but he can't even remember ever being part of Crimson Lightning. Brimming with anger, she asks if he wants her to kick that jerk out of town, and Dennis knows she has the power to do it, but tells her to cool it. Katie grumbles that Dennis can be a real pain sometimes, but honestly, she kind of likes that about him. Putting all that aside, the chef asks his old friend what she wants to eat. Just then, Aetlier shows up to order the daily special for Bokal, who's finally out of bed. Dennis smiles as Aetlier pulls out a chair for the sick girl, and Katie orders the same dish for herself. Once the food is ready, both of them get their meals and can finally dig in. Katie dives right in, no hesitation, and shows Bokal that eating can actually be a lifesaver. Then, after Dennis reminds her that she's still there, The girl snaps out of it and tries the house's signature fried shrimp with the special sauce. Her reaction, it's like she died and went to heaven, only to come back after tasting something that incredible. From that moment on, she just couldn't stop eating, savoring every bite with pure delight. After her trip back, Katie arrives at the Silver Wing base, where her teammates are murmuring about Captain Vigo's foul mood and how the squad's missions have been going downhill lately. Lost in thought, she accidentally bumps right into the captain himself. Vigo shoots a glance at the gossiping pair and orders them out to the day's mission, then turns to Katie, mentioning that he heard she went to see Dennis. Katie explains she'd been missing her friend's cooking after all. There are few things in this world she enjoys more than one of his meals. Actually, maybe it was nostalgia, but when she tasted last night's dish, she was so happy she invited the chef to come back to Silver Wing. According to her, the whole group's been teetering on collapse since Dennis left. But he isn't interested, he has no intention of coming back. Katie goes on, Dennis was the backbone of the squad's support team, and now that he's gone, the members who relied on him are getting more and more irritated with Vigo, who's done nothing to fill the gap. Dennis stands his ground, this is his life now. Sure, his customers might be a bit unhinged, but he's happy, he likes this restaurant, and he's not planning on returning to that stressful team anytime soon. In the end, Dennis makes it clear he's a cook, not an adventurer. One way or another, Vigo also makes it clear that he doesn't want Dennis back on the team. In fact, he orders Katie to stay away from him altogether. Upset, she can't understand how things got to this point. But the captain won't say another word and shuts down the conversation then and there. Meanwhile, Dennis's restaurant is absolutely packed. Customers crowding in and putting his cooking speed to the test. He's got to whip up magic-infused ramen and Ankei Kajin yakisoba for everyone. At the same time, Aitlir proves she's not slacking off, jotting down every order while dashing back and forth. Vivia comments that the restaurant is finally thriving, and Henrietta agrees it's hard to resist the chef's food. Suddenly, the mage gets served by Bokkel and is surprised to see her working there. From now on, she's going to live and help out at the restaurant, and she's grateful to her friends for always stopping by when she wasn't feeling well. Vivia is happy for her, but points out that she shouldn't push herself so hard. Embarrassed, Bokkel admits she only feels at ease when she's working. Besides, her mini-wise companion Aitlir is always by her side, come what may. Dennis shows up and says the two of them make a great team, which Henrietta wholeheartedly agrees with. Anyway, that's not the only reason he's here to serve his most loyal customers and dear friends some of his shrimp dishes. As soon as they take a bite, their reaction is exactly what you'd expect, worshipping those shrimp like they were gods. Henrietta understands perfectly why the restaurant is so packed right now, she's even proud to be a regular. Dennis corrects her, she's not a regular, she's a freeloader, killing her scammy vibe on the spot. Vivia is shocked to realize her friend still hasn't paid the chef back. She tries every excuse, explaining how hard it's been to find a job in this economy. But either way, the chef shoots her a menacing look and makes it clear if she keeps dodging her bill, things are going to get heated. Vivia tries to change the subject by pointing out how many customers there are and asking if it's tough to serve everyone at once. Dennis praises Aitlir for keeping everything running smoothly, so Vivia figures the little one must be having fun. Bokkel, in turn, asks if something good happened to her friend, since she's so upbeat. Right then, Dennis freezes and drops a bowl on the floor. He asks if Vivia can come by the restaurant on his next day off, he needs some advice. Henrietta jumps in, offering her own advice if the chef needs it, but he shoots her down immediately. Still not sure what's going on, Vivia agrees to the invitation. On the other hand, Henrietta hasn't just been shut out by that invitation, life itself has kicked her down. Out of work, her life is flat broke. She doesn't even have hot water at home. She misses the public baths, where at least she didn't have to freeze under a cold shower. The problem is, she doesn't have money for a bath there either, she needs to pay the chef first. Speaking of which, totally anxious about whatever Dennis and Vivia are going to talk about on his day off. Henrietta is convinced they'll be plotting how to ban her from the restaurant. She's determined to do something to stop that from happening. Fast forward to the day off, Vivia heads to the restaurant and hears from Dennis that Aitlir seems to have a boyfriend. Completely frazzled, Dennis explains he started giving her an allowance recently, and after that, she's been going out all the time. He just can't handle the thought that she might be involved with some random guy. To make matters worse, Dennis confides, in a panic, that he saw her with a boy and now he's pounding the table, demanding to know if that kid is his adopted daughter's boyfriend. Vivia tries to calm him down, suggesting he just ask her instead of overthinking. But the truth is Dennis can't bring himself to broach the subject. If the boy really is her boyfriend, Dennis says, the least he could do is show up and gift the father-in-law with a box of sweets or something. Since he didn't, that proves he's weak and shallow. And if that's the case, Dennis won't stand for it. He'll only accept the guy if he's over level 80. Just then, Aetlier pops in, asking what they're talking about, and Dennis nearly falls over from panic. Vivia, showing a bit more maturity, tries to play it off, saying they were just chatting about cooking. The little girl pipes up that she wants to learn too. And to keep the act going, Dennis tells her to wash her hands and get ready to start learning. Once that's done, he brings both of them over to the counter to teach them the right way to cut onions so the flavor of Ritra's katsudon really stands out. Their eyes start to sting from the onion's bite. And even though Vivia is complaining too, the chef's attention is entirely on Aetlier, who can't help but feel left out. Watching Aetlier work, Dennis remembers the day he first learned to cut onions from his mom. That day, she noticed he was secretly using a skill to keep his eyes from burning. He asked how she could tell, and she just smiled and said, "No matter what you do, I always know." Lost in the memory, Dennis snaps back to reality to find Aetlier has dropped eggshells into the bowl. He jumps in to help with the cooking, joining Aetlier and Vivia. The three of them share a rare moment of teamwork and learning, the kind of scene you'd expect from a real family. When everyone's dishes are finally ready, Dennis praises Aetlier for her first attempt, telling her it's impressive for a beginner. On the other side, Vivia holds his plate up like a trophy and brags about his own skills, only to get annoyed when he realizes the chef only has eyes for his fake daughter. Right then, the city bell rings. Without missing a beat, Aetlier slips out of the restaurant, saying she's going for a walk but dodges any specific questions about where she's headed. Just then, Bokkel wakes up, so Dennis tells her to eat the 2 katsudons that are ready. Vivia reminds everyone that one of them is his, but Dennis cuts him off and hands Bokkel the shopping list instead. Looking confused, she asks if Dennis isn't going with her, but he explains that he and Vivia have a little something to take care of right now. Next, Henrietta bursts into the restaurant to announce she's passed a test to join an adventurer group, but the chef interrupts her mid-sentence and asks if she'd like to go shopping with Bokkel today. Eager to prove she can be useful, she says yes on the spot. And with that, Dennis bolts out the door, dragging Vivia along with him. Out at the street market, the chef and the mage spot Aetlier saying goodbye to an old lady. Vivia grumbles that they shouldn't be stalking the girl like this, but Dennis shrugs it off after all. He's her protector. If that's the case, Vivia asks why he doesn't just go talk to his daughter. Dennis admits he can't bring himself to do it, so the mage declares he's basically a stalker at this point. Ignoring the young wizard's words, the level 99 chef turns the kid's head towards Aetlier and points out the last thing he wanted to see, his adopted daughter chatting it up with some boy at a market stall. Dennis is practically about to explode, while Vivia points out he doesn't even know if that kid is her boyfriend, and that it's important for her to have friends too, still tuning his friend out. Dennis keeps a close eye as Aetlier gets led by the boy into a jewelry store. Now Dennis is really freaking out. He's convinced she's about to buy a wedding ring. Amid the chaos brewing in his mind, Vivia comes up with an idea. After their errands, Bokkel notices her friend looks worried and asks if she's okay. Henrietta says she can't stop thinking about her debt to the chef. Bokkel doesn't get why the adventurer can't save any money, considering the missions pay well. Henrietta explains that, besides equipment upkeep, she's always getting herself hurt and blowing cash on potions just to recover. As strange as it sounds, Henrietta feels like the more she works, the less money she has. Now that money's tight, she really wants to find some way to repay Dennis for everything he's done for her, but she just doesn't know how. Bokkel, for her part, praises her friend's character for caring so much, and is rewarded with a heartfelt hug. At that moment, the girls overhear 2 men gossiping about the captain of the Night Mist troop. Apparently, the guy got humiliated by a restaurant manager who, as it turns out, is rumored to be a former Silver Wing. In the end, the 2 hope the Night Mist troop doesn't come looking for revenge against the chef. Hearing this, Bokkel and Henrietta exchange a tense glance. Meanwhile, Vivia borrows a megaphone from a nearby shop. But it's not just any megaphone, it's a magical item used for speeches and plays. Imbued with wind magic, it lets voices carry over a distance. With this in hand, the duo manages to sneak close to a jewelry store window to eavesdrop on what Aetlier is saying inside. The first thing they hear her say is, "It's beautiful. I love it. A treasure for life." Aetlier is so happy to have met you." Naturally, Dennis completely loses his mind hearing that and has a meltdown right there in the street. Meanwhile, a woman's purse is stolen by a thief using wind magic. So Dennis quickly pulls himself together to see what happened to the victim. In the meantime, the thief is gloating about how easily he took the old lady's money, but he's not prepared for a man sprinting toward him at full speed with a child slung over his shoulder. Feeling pretty confident, the thief is level 30 and figures that's more than enough to shake off this nuisance. But he quickly realizes he's in trouble when he sees his pursuer is keeping up without even using magic. So, the thief uses his wind magic to leap over rooftops and cut through alleyways, trying to lose Dennis. But Dennis just powers through, copying the thief's path and blocking his escape. Even so, he admits that a little magic would come in handy, so Vivia casts the only spell he knows, the palm. It basically creates a trampoline in the shape of a hand, letting Dennis boost his speed even more, much to the terror of the child hanging on for dear life. Still, Vivia manages to keep casting palms, even if a bit haphazardly, keeping their wild chase going at full throttle. At one point, Dennis nearly catches up to the fugitive, but the guy was skilled with wind magic and managed to slip away before Dennis could grab him. And to make matters worse, the guy even had the nerve to taunt the chef as he escaped. That's when Dennis takes it personally and goes right back to the chase, warning Vivia that she might fall off his shoulder at any moment. But if she does, she should at least land safely, even if it's from a pretty big height. Strangely enough, as they're flying through the market, they spot Henrietta and Bockel. Speaking of them, the two girls get bumped into by the purse thief, and that ends up sealing his fate. After all, now Henrietta has a reason to go after him, and she puts a stop to his escape with a well-placed punch. After that, the warrior sees Dennis arrive and recognizes her for a job well done. That turns out to be the best reward she could have hoped for, since all she really wanted was to repay the kindness and warmth Dennis had shown her. Once all the chaos settles, the chef takes the girls back to the restaurant to dish out some gossip about Aetlier, or, well, he's not totally sure if she's dating someone, but it definitely looked that way. Changing the subject, Bockel says Henrietta was terrified she'd get banned from the restaurant, but Dennis just smiles and reassures her there's no way he could ever kick out someone who enjoys his food so much. Then, getting a bit more serious, he reminds everyone that even his patience has limits when it comes to freeloaders. A moment later, Aetlier finally returns, and the whole restaurant goes quiet, everyone curious about where she's been. She crosses the room and hands Dennis a present. She says she saved up to buy this jewel because it's the same color as his eyes. Dennis is over the moon, but when Henrietta almost blurts out that he'd been following the girl around, Dennis playfully threatens to ban her from the restaurant for real this time. Aetlier then asks her honorary dad to put on the bracelet. So he does, and suddenly, he feels like the happiest man in the world. Aetlier's eyes well up with tears, and she grabs onto his pant leg in a gesture full of love and affection. Meanwhile, Vigo, the leader of the Silver Wing, heads to a mansion to reunite with someone he hasn't seen in a long time. The next day, after the last lunch customers had left the restaurant, Dennis stretched, relieved that his shift was finally over. He asked Aetlier to clean up the outside area for him. But just as she headed out, someone else walked into the place. The chef quickly called out that they weren't serving any more meals for now, but the man dressed in a butler's uniform paid him no mind. Instead, he dropped to his knees in tears before Aetlier, calling her "my lady." Henrietta reached for her sword, just in case this was another creep with a thing for young girls, but the man quickly introduced himself as Stevens, butler to Aetlier Workstat. At the sound of that surname, Vivia and Bockel's jaws dropped, though Dennis and Henrietta had no idea what it meant. Bockel explained that House Workstat was the kingdom's greatest family of mages, the very top of the magical world. Still sobbing, Stevens sat down, unable to believe that his lady had been reduced to waiting tables in a place like this. Dennis was about ready to toss the guy out, but the kids were eager to hear what he had to say. Stevens began to explain he'd been the butler at the Workstat estate, and he was here to fetch Aetlier at the request of the Royal Court of Justice. The girl's late father, Lord Falmas, had a younger brother named Joseph who had stolen her inheritance, claiming she wasn't really of the family's bloodline. That was how the poor girl ended up cast out. But now, her father's will had come to light, and in it, he'd made clear that Aetlier was his rightful heir, entitled to all the family's wealth and power. The government had accepted the will as valid. For Stevens, that meant it was finally time to expose Joseph's tyranny and restore the abandoned heir to her place. But after listening carefully to everything, Aetlier flat out refused all that fortune. She had no interest in any of it. She didn't say why, but flashes of trauma clearly haunted her, and it was obvious she wanted nothing to do with her uncle. Stevens was desperate, insisting the girl shouldn't have to work in a dirty little dive like this, which only irritated Dennis even more. Still, the cook couldn't help but admit to himself that he was just an ordinary guy in a small town, and Aetlier was the daughter of a wealthy family. He tried to understand whether she really wanted to give up everything that was rightfully hers because, in his mind, it wasn't something she should dismiss so easily, especially considering her future. Aetlier finally said she'd go as long as Dennis went with her. In the end, Dennis agreed to accompany her on this difficult journey. Vivia, perhaps getting a little too dressed up, decided to join the group for this adventure, which would take a few days, while Henrietta and Bockel stayed behind to watch the restaurant. Then, the star of this story, Aetlier Workstad, appeared stunning her friends in a gorgeous purple dress. She herself, though, was anything but happy. If she were being honest, she'd have given anything to sort this out without having to return to the royal capital, the last place she wanted to be right now. But Dennis promised he'd stay by her side the whole time. Standing by the carriage that would carry them all, Stevens invited his lady and the rest of the rabble to climb aboard. Dennis wondered aloud if anything could be done about the butler's attitude, but Vivia just shrugged, admitting they really were just rabble. After all, the journey began, and after several long hours, the group arrived in the royal capital. Vivia was wide-eyed, totally smitten by the beauty of the enormous city, while Dennis had to tell him to dial back the country boy act. Like Aetlier, the ex-adventurer never expected to set foot in this place again. But here he was. Vivia pointed out the Black's restaurant, famous for serving the best food in the capital. Dennis, lost in thought, barely reacted, and although he considered stopping by at some point, he ultimately decided against it. He knew they'd only ask how he dared show his face around there. Soon after, they reached a government building, where they were greeted by Sestovich, the lawyer handling the case. First, he explained that they'd need to examine Miss Aetlier's blood. As soon as the poor girl saw the needle, she had the same reaction any kid would. She shook with fear at the sight of that sharp thing that was about to pierce her skin and draw her blood. A man managed to do it gently, but even though the whole process went smoothly, Aetlier nearly fainted. Sestovich then invited her guardian to join him for the next step. So Dennis left Aetlier in Vivia's arms and went along. Dennis wanted more details about the case, so the lawyer explained. The previous head of the family, Lord Falmaz, had possessed a powerful hypnosis magic, a type of spell only certain bloodlines could wield, or which could be granted to those with truly exceptional talent. Either way, it was rare, and Falmaz was one of the few who had it. House Workstad carried that magical bloodline, and Lord Falmaz had used his gifts to help countless people. But his brother Joseph, eager to claim that position for himself, had supposedly arranged for the couple's deaths and questioned Aetlier's legitimacy, which got her thrown out of the family. That alone could have been the end of her. But Lord Falmaz had been clever enough to leave a will, and now that it had surfaced, the government had ordered a new investigation to confirm Aetlier's lineage. The investigation would use a magical device that Sestovich now showed Dennis a room with a giant transparent sphere at its center. The lawyer placed Aetlier's blood inside, then added Lord Falmaz's blood, and the sphere began to fill with crystals. According to Sestovich, if the pattern took on the shape of a flower, it meant the two people were first-degree relatives. Even using the blood of Falmaz's wife, Lady Eliza, the result was the same, which proved that Aetlier was their daughter. In short, her chances of winning the case were very high. Soon after, before the court and the magical sphere, the judge announced the start of the trial to determine whether Aetlier's lineage was genuine. If so, she would be named the rightful heir to House Workstad, just as her father, Lord Falmaz, had declared in his will. Joseph cuts in, his voice dripping with irony, mocking the presence of the cowardly adventurer who'd been expelled from Silver Wing. Dennis, unbothered, replies that he doesn't know Joseph and asks if, by any chance, he's a customer of Vigo's. Setting that aside, Dennis condemns what Lord Falmaz's brother did to Aetlier, promising to see that justice is served. Speaking of justice, the judge bangs his gavel and demands silence from Mr. Dennis Blacks. The moment she hears that surname, Vivia instantly recalls the Blacks restaurant. The judge then reminds everyone that the purpose of this hearing is to determine the legitimacy of the will, one that names Aetlier as the heir to the family fortune and headship, while Joseph is left with the knowledge and books from the house. Joseph's lawyer stands up and claims that while Aetlier is indeed Lord Falmaz's daughter, Her mother isn't Eliza, his wife, but rather his mistress, a woman of humble origins, lacking the lineage required to inherit leadership of the family that rules over all mages. On the other hand, Cestovich promises to prove that Aetlier is Eliza's daughter using the magic sphere. The test he performed not long ago guarantees instant confirmation. Yet, Joseph remains oddly confident. With a smirk, he declares, "A mistress's child is a mistress's child. This is a waste of time. Now it's up to Aetlier's lawyer to prove the truth." So a doctor draws more blood from the girl for a fresh test. At that moment, the judge initiates a lottery to randomly choose who will activate the magic sphere, hoping to prevent any foul play. Once the drawing is over, the butler Stevens is chosen. Having drawn the marked stick from the container, he approaches the sphere, dramatically wiping the sweat from his brow with a hand towel. Following the judge's instructions, Stevens must first add Miss Aetlier's blood, then Lord Falmouth's. As soon as he does, the cluster of crystals blossoms into a flower, confirming the bond between father and daughter, much to Dennis's relief. Next, they add Aetlier's blood again, but this time with Lady Eliza's. At first, a flower forms, indicating a match. But then, for some reason, it distorts, showing that the two are not mother and daughter. Joseph can barely contain himself, he told them so. But Cestovich insists there must have been a malfunction and requests another test. The judge refuses. Joseph, triumphant, doubles down. He loudly proclaims that Aetlier is the result of his brother's weakness for his mistress and that she cannot inherit the family's fortune. Hearing this, the poor girl trembles with humiliation and nerves. Given the circumstances, the judge declares that part of the will is invalid. But since it's been proven that the child is Lord Falmouth's daughter, the rest must be reconsidered. As such, the wealth and power of House Werkstadt remain with Lord Joseph, while the knowledge and books go to Miss Aetlier. Joseph, unsurprisingly, is pleased with this outcome, and can't resist pointing out that, for all her flaws, the girl is still his brother's child. Looking around, Dennis spots something odd in Stevens's hand. He stands and strides straight toward the butler. Grabbing him by the collar, Dennis lifts the man off his feet. A bloodied cloth drops to the floor, revealing a cut on Stevens's hand. Dennis accuses him of mixing his own blood into the test to sabotage the results. Stevens breaks down and admits he was promised his old position as head butler if he helped Joseph. Overcome by rage, the chef unleashes a power that leaves Stevens badly hurt. The judge orders Dennis back to his seat immediately, but Dennis picks up 2 sticks from the floor, proving there was no marked stick in the container at all. The whole thing was rigged so Stevens would be chosen to run the test. With the truth exposed, he accuses Joseph and his cronies of dragging a child through hell and then pulling her back just to make her suffer even more. At this point, the guards rush Dennis, but the former adventurer is consumed by fury and swears to burn everyone who hurt Aetlier, but Vivia grabs him from behind, begging him to think twice. If he lashes out now, he'll be branded an enemy of the realm and likely thrown in prison. If that happens, Aetlier will have no one left to care for her. Realizing what's at stake, Dennis reins in his rage and looks straight at the girl. After all the chaos, Cestovich tells Dennis his conduct in court will be overlooked. As for everything else that happened, the chef is filled with regret for having brought Aetlier to this viper's nest. But the lawyer points out that, regardless, the knowledge and books of House Werkstadt are still in the girl's hands, so it's worth taking a look. And so, Dennis, Aetlier, and Vivia head to the family's book repository, which has been all but abandoned and is now little more than a storeroom full of cobwebs and rats. Even so, the lawyer hopes there's something of value inside, though the sorry state of the place suggests otherwise. Watching out for loose floorboards, Dennis warns Aetlier to mind her step, but it's not the rotting wood that catches her off guard. She accidentally stumbles into a magical storeroom and reveals a hidden chamber beneath the floor. Once inside, Vivia and Cestovich are stunned by the books they find. The young mage spots a chronicle of the first king, Jungfrey, while the lawyer recognizes a research log belonging to the king of strange devices. Usada work so rare, it shouldn't even exist anymore. In short, this tiny secret library is home to world-shaking treasures, the complete works of Mongolmore, the Enuma series, and more. It's basically a repository for all of humanity's magical history. Seeing this, Cestovich wonders if, in the end, Lord Falmouth truly meant for Aetlier to inherit these things after all. After all, even if the will didn't go as planned, Joseph would seize the wealth and power. and that would end up pushing the inheritance toward Miss Aitlier. Dennis chuckled, calling it a masterstroke, then asked what the girl planned to do with the treasure she'd found. She asked for all the books to be brought to the restaurant so everyone could have access, and the chef thought it was a brilliant idea. Vivia, on the other hand, freaked out. He couldn't believe she was really going to treat a part of the world's cultural heritage like they were just magazines. Dennis burst out laughing. The next day, the cook waited for Vivia to show up with Aitlier so they could leave the capital together. But the young mage had overslept, so he ended up running late. On his way, he passed a man in a cape and top hat who looked exactly like Dennis, but the energy the man gave off was completely different. Not far from there, Dennis was shouting for Vivia to hurry up, and the man in the top hat, overhearing, commented on how beautiful the child's name was. The boy thanked him for the compliment and said goodbye, just as a girl named Fiorenza called out to Heath and asked who that person was. Heath replied that it was a companion of his counterpart, the one he'd mentioned before. The next day, the line to get into the restaurant nearly wrapped around the block. Inside, while enjoying their meal, Henrietta and Vivia were delighted to see so many mages and scholars, no doubt drawn in by the books Aitlier had inherited. Speaking of which, a wizard flipped open one of those books and realized it was part of the definitive collection sought after by the greatest sorcerers alive, while another was stunned to find the Necrophaco. Seeing how overly excited these guys were, Dennis made it clear he didn't mind them reading while they ate so long as they left once they were finished. Suddenly, while the chef was busy juggling the flood of orders, one customer finally worked up the courage to approach him and say he might be able to cure his wife's illness by studying the complete works of Mongolmore. Hearing this, Dennis called out to Aitlier, telling her there was a man in trouble. The owner of the books granted him a special lending permit so he could try to save the love of his life. But when others saw the man walking out with the book, 3 more asked if they could take some home too. Dennis quickly shut that down. This was a one-time exception. Book in hand, the desperate husband thanked them from the bottom of his heart and left. Moments later, more customers poured in, shouting their orders straight at the chef. Even with dozens of requests coming at him all at once, he remembered every single one. More impressively, he unleashed his magical abilities in full force. Working the kitchen at lightning speed, Vivia asked if it was really okay for him to burn through all his spells at once, and he answered that there was simply no way to keep up otherwise. Watching his skill in action, Aitlier could only stare, mouth open in awe. The scene shifted to an old memory of a small, abandoned child wandering the rainy streets, while other children walked by smiling under their umbrellas. This one had no protection except a ragged cloak, and was forced to eat scraps of meat left on the ground. Soaked and shivering, the child sat there in silent misery as the rain dripped down their head. Then, a woman passing by dropped her wallet. The child picked it up and returned it to her. Moved by the boy's kindness, the woman took him to the restaurant where she worked for something to eat. He didn't even know how to hold a spoon properly. But the moment he tasted the food, it was as if his whole world had burst into color. The joy was so overwhelming, he couldn't stop eating, tears streaming down his face as he did. Back in the present, Dennis awoke after fainting. He tried to get up, his body burning hot, but the kids stopped him. He worried about the restaurant, but Bockel told him he couldn't be stressing about that in his condition. They'd already closed for the day, clearly in no shape to work. Dennis apologized and lay back down. Aitlier placed the ice bag back on his forehead. The chef asked why she looked so down, and Vivia explained that she'd been worried, sick, afraid he might have caught something serious, or even that he wouldn't wake up at all. Dennis gave a faint chuckle and assured her it was nothing major, then drifted back to sleep. Vivia added that, according to the doctor, it was probably just a cold, though the young mage suspected he'd simply overworked himself. Henrietta agreed he hadn't taken a single day off since returning from the capital. Vivia planned to give him some medicine when he woke, but until then, he needed rest. With that, all the children left, except for Aitlier, who insisted on staying by the side of the man who, by now, was practically a father to her. Meanwhile, the others, though aware of why the chef had collapsed, still worried it might be something worse, so they tried to think of a way to help. Bockel suggested making a nourishing rice porridge, and everyone liked the idea. After all, proper food was essential for good health. Henrietta, the most enthusiastic of them all, suited up in full armor so she wouldn't burn herself at the stove. Thinking about the ingredients, she grabbed a huge cut of meat and could only picture it perfectly grilled. Vivia, on the other hand, wondered at what point this airhead had forgotten they were making porridge. Unbothered, Henrietta grabbed a massive cleaver to chop the meat, looking for a moment like she might split the entire restaurant in two, so Vivia rushed in to stop her from destroying the chef's workplace. Just then, Bokkel came in with a bucket of ice for Aetlir and stumbled upon the chaos between the kids. In the middle of it all, Sestovich heard the commotion from outside and burst into the restaurant to see what was going on. In Dennis's room, he accidentally dropped the ice bag from his head. Aetlir checked his temperature, it was still hot. Somehow, the poor girl blamed herself for his exhaustion. After all, he had poured out every ounce of his strength in that courtroom to save her. Because of Dennis, she'd been given a second chance at life. And for that, she was grateful enough to put the ice bag back on his head with a smile. Back in the past, a man shouted that Dennis wouldn't get away with his mischief this time. Hanging from a window like a monkey and dressed as a cook. The boy protested that he'd only been helping in the kitchen, then jumped down and bolted. The woman who had taken him in came over to ask what happened, and the assistant explained that the brat had been pulling pranks again. This time, he'd messed with the julienne cabbage the cook had prepared, chopping it into even tinier pieces. The man muttered that the kid must have forgotten how much he owed the head chef for taking him in. The woman admitted Dennis wasn't the type to take scoldings well, and the man sighed that the boy would just stay spoiled and never listen to anyone. But she believed that one day, Dennis would understand because that was simply the way he was. Out of the corner of his eye, the boy overheard the conversation, and it seemed to hit him hard. One day, Dennis came running in, grinning from ear to ear after finally managing to make fried rice with each grain perfectly separate. He burst straight into the restaurant, bowl in hand. One of the waiters thought about scolding the boy after all. This place was far too upscale for that kind of commotion, but in the end, he decided to just let fate take the wheel. Carefree, Dennis glanced around, wondering what to do with his prized creation. That's when a woman nearby commented on how good it smelled. A customer, intrigued, remarked on how impressive it was that Black's restaurant had such a young and talented cook. Thrilled, Dennis offered her a taste, but the moment she tried it, she nearly spat it all out right there. Within seconds, several staff members rushed over to help, until the head chef herself appeared to see what on earth was going on. She quickly learned that Dennis had given the customer something questionable. Taking the fried rice from the boy, she cast a quick spell on the dish, then served the very same portion back to the woman. The lady, still suspicious, hesitantly took another bite, and this time her eyes lit up in delight. The chef explained that her apprentice had simply forgotten to add a crucial ingredient. Later, Dennis approached her like a guilty puppy, apologizing for using a strange ability on the food. The woman seized the moment to drive home the importance of using the right kind of magic, and Dennis began to cry, convinced he'd made something wonderful when in fact he hadn't. She comforted him, telling him he needed to study more but also to listen to people. After promising he would, Dennis asked how she'd managed to save the dish. She told him it was child's play for her after all. She was known as the legendary fried rice master. And, she added, he could be one too someday. That sent the boy's spirits soaring. Back in the present, Vivia asked why Sestovich had shown up. The lawyer admitted he was a magic fanatic and had come to read one of the volumes the Aetlir had inherited. But right now, Dennis looked unwell. Helping him was more important than catching up on his reading. So, the man asked what they planned to cook for the chef, and Henrietta, eyes sparkling, replied, rice porridge. Hearing that, Sestovich declared it was time to cook the rice to the kids' amazement. Like some wise hermit from the mountains, he explained that once you had perfectly cooked rice, then the true making of rice porridge began. The real discussion, he said, should be about which magic to use to prepare the finest rice possible. According to him, the king of strange devices, Yusat, had combined skills in a multifunctional way and thus created the magic in question. Before going into law, Sestovich had been a passionate researcher, so he knew these things firsthand. Bokkel, being a mage herself, joined in, pointing out that sorcery fundamentals dictated one should use flame magic, but the problem was that the heat's intensity changed depending on the user's imagination and skill. Vivia agreed, adding that if the fire wasn't consistent, the rice could end up dry or mushy. So Sestovich proposed using the spectral fire produced by Ghost Flame. Its heat strength could be controlled by the amount of mana used, allowing for more precise cooking. Henrietta, completely lost in all this magical talk, just stared blankly. while Vivia warned that Ghost Flame had one drawback. It wouldn't produce the crispy, golden crust at the bottom of the pot. Not wanting to lose that crunchy goodness, Bachl suggested combining flame magic with Ghost Flame. Cestovich agreed, but Vivia strongly objected, saying that the two together would make the fire's consistency unstable all over again. Sweating, Cestovich admitted they'd reached a dead end. Still, Vivia wasn't ready to give up. She suggested using a pot imbued by alchemists with high-quality magical catalysts to force the temperature to remain constant. Bachl nearly cried, realizing this might be their only choice. In the end, after all that back and forth, Cestovich had the answer. They'd use both Ghost Flame and regular flame magic, and counter the unstable heat with a catalyst-infused pot to keep it steady. That way, they'd cook the most delicious rice the world had ever seen. With that decided, the next question arose: how to use magic to turn that rice into perfect porridge. Henrietta, worn out by the endless debate, just wanted it all to be over. Luckily, Vivia and Bachl called for a break. Their heads were fried from thinking so much. Just then, the octopus walked into the restaurant, having heard the chef was ill. He brought a catalog featuring a magical rice box, a device capable of making outstanding rice with the crispy crust, and he was offering it at half price. As if that weren't enough, this model had a special porridge mode. Henrietta asked if it would work without Ghost Flame or regular flames, and the merchant just stared at her. Why on earth would anyone cook the rice first and then make porridge? You just boil water, throw in the raw rice, and voila, porridge. Hearing that, the three so-called mages wished they could disappear into the floor. Either way, they scrapped all the complicated plans and decided to just buy the magic box. Following the manual's instructions, all they had to do was set it and let it cook the porridge for them. Aetlier came in to say Dennis's fever had gone down, which made Henrietta happy. The chef would probably be able to eat the porridge after all, and knowing what his friends were making for him, Aetlier suggested adding eggs to the recipe to make it even more nutritious. Her friends praised the little girl's cooking skills. After all, she'd learned a lot from the head chef. According to Aetlier, you should whisk an egg as if you were slicing it. Bachl mentioned that the only omelet she could eat was the sweet kind, while Vivia said it was just the opposite. In her opinion, a proper omelet needed to have the taste of broth. Seeing Henrietta looking lost again, the two asked if there was anything she simply couldn't eat. After a brief pause to think, the blonde confidently declared that she didn't like eating leather shoes. While Bachl nearly teared up in sadness, Vivia asked if she was actually saying she eats shoes. Henrietta explained that, yes, her family used to eat them. Her father claimed that leather shoes were made from animal skin. Hearing that, Bachl felt sorry for her friend, while Vivia decided it was best to drop the subject. Later on, Dennis woke up to find Aetlier walking into the room with a bowl of egg porridge in hand. The moment he tasted it, the cook felt the same warmth he'd experienced back when he was taken in by that head chef at Black's restaurant. When he complimented the flavor and asked if she had made it, Aetlier blushed, smiled, and explained that she'd stirred the eggs exactly the way the chef had taught her, as if slicing them. Then she added that the porridge itself had actually been made by the octopus, instantly shattering the tender moment and sending the cook into a quiet panic. The next day, Henrietta was cheerfully skipping through the market streets, so much so that an old lady couldn't help but remark, "The young miss looks quite happy today." A little further ahead, the girl ran into Vivia and proudly showed him the mountain of luggage she was carrying. According to her, she was so excited about today's celebration that she decided to come fully prepared. One of the merchants stopped them and joked that it was unusual to see the two of them out at lunchtime instead of at Dennis's restaurant. They explained that the adventurer's restaurant would be closed for a while because of a special day. Meanwhile, back at the establishment, Dennis found Bachl and Aetlier with their bags packed. Noticing Aetlier's outfit, he pointed out that she didn't really need to wear that for the trip, but she seemed unwilling to change. Henrietta and Vivia soon arrived, and Dennis announced that it was time to leave. But before setting off, Henrietta wanted to make sure everyone had brought towels. They all nodded. Next, she asked about soap, and everyone showed theirs, then buckets. And finally, before departure, it was time for everyone to take a bath. So the group gathered to wash up, and Vivia couldn't hide his amazement at the chef's chiseled physique. Grinning ear to ear, Dennis declared that this is what a man should look like. On the other hand, he questioned why the kid was so scrawny, to which Vivia replied that it was fine, he was a mage, after all. Besides, he simply couldn't understand how the chef had built so much muscle. Dennis revealed that the secret was doing 2,000 push-ups every single day. which led Vivia Strange to conclude that this man definitely wasn't human. Setting that aside, Dennis asked why the boy wasn't going towel-free like any normal person would in a public bath. Clearly embarrassed, Vivia tried to cover himself, but the chef wasn't about to let him off easy and even attempted to yank the towel away. Meanwhile, the girls were enjoying a peaceful, friendly atmosphere, nothing but soap and laughter. At one point, Bockel wondered aloud when Henrietta had developed such a striking figure, though the warrior, as usual, insisted she wasn't any different from other women. Aetlier, on the other hand, felt a little insecure, admitting she still didn't feel like a real woman yet. Later that day, Dennis prepared a big plate of snacks for the group and poured drinks. Now the main event of the evening could begin. The chef placed Henrietta in charge of the opening speech. Completely caught off guard, the poor girl panicked, but Dennis argued that she was the only Henrietta at the table. And so, trembling, she began by thanking him for gathering everyone there despite his tiring routine and endless responsibilities. Dennis chuckled, saying she sounded like a robot, which only made her more emotional. She went on to admit that she owed the chef a great debt, but was happy to finally have found a job with the Knight's Order, where she could dedicate herself to helping people. Vivia quipped that the scoundrel could finally start paying back what she owed the chef. Then the mage himself announced that he had found another group of adventurers. They weren't as famous as his old companions, but it was an important step for him on his path to becoming a great wizard. Henrietta teased that he could now pay off his debt to the restaurant as well. But Vivia protested he refused to be compared to a freeloader, since he always paid for his meals, unlike her. To wrap things up, Bockel stood and revealed that she had decided to return home to her parents and become a teacher at the Royal Capital's magic school, having been invited even before graduation. With everyone sharing their life updates, Dennis raised a toast to celebrate the group's growth. It was time to eat, drink, and dream of the future while savoring the present. Watching Aetlier unintentionally intimidate Bockel by insisting that nearly raw meat was cooked enough, Vivia commented to Dennis that the two seemed to have become great friends. Then he sighed, lamenting that everyone seemed to be moving on, and that things were bound to get lonelier from now on. His words made the others uneasy as well. Henrietta even considered postponing her new job, an idea Bockel thought was reasonable. But Dennis reminded them that now, at last, they had the chance to do what they had always wanted, and that they shouldn't throw it away if it mattered that much. Vivia and Bockel agreed, while Henrietta grew so motivated that she declared she would leave town the very next morning. Aetlier pointed out she hadn't even started the job yet, and everyone burst into laughter when the warrior realized how nonsensical her idea was. As the night went on, Dennis whipped up another feast using his level 99 magic, leaving everyone in awe. Soon, a generous portion of fried rice was served to each of them when suddenly, Polvo appeared, helping himself to a plate. Drawn by the irresistible aroma, the merchant explained that he couldn't stay away. Dennis recognized him as that shady vendor who sold all sorts of oddities but annoyed him by forgetting his name. When Aetlier reminded him it was Polvo, the man celebrated that at least someone remembered and even took the chance to invite the girl to work at his shop again. Dennis smacked him on the head, warning him not to pester his little mascot like that. Still, since it was thanks to Polvo that Dennis had tasted that egg porridge, he decided not to beat him up. In fact, he was even considering adding a new dish to the menu using that recipe and the magical pot. Finally, he asked what exactly that sly merchant was doing there. Polvo begged not to be called sly in front of Aetlier and explained that he had heard Dennis was holding a barbecue. So he came to offer a banquet only he could provide, a piece of level 5 Hagen meat. Grinning at the merchant's generosity, Dennis pulled out 2 razor-sharp kitchen knives and accepted the challenge. Moments later, the slab of meat was tossed high into the air, and the chef sliced it into dozens of perfectly measured pieces. Once that was done, the meat hit the fire and was served to the boys, who somehow managed to feel even more satisfied. Despite having already enjoyed a whole series of dishes prepared by the city's renowned chef. Feeling down, Octopus muttered under his breath that his idea had been to offer it only to Aetlier. By the way, the girl slipped a piece of meat into Dennis's mouth, and the merchant admitted he was jealous. Seeing that, she did him the same favor, and the big guy nearly fainted from sheer joy. Sometime later, while Octopus was asleep, dreaming of poor Aetlier, Vivia finally asked Dennis the question he'd been holding back for so long. In court, they'd called him Dennis Blacks, so the mage wanted to know if the chef was related to anyone from the Blacks restaurant. The man explained that the family name Blacks actually belonged to the head cook, his foster mother, whose name he had once carried, but he didn't want to use it anymore, not after storming out following a nasty fight back when he was close to level 90. Looking back, Dennis admitted he'd been full of himself, and his mother had only tried to keep him grounded. Vivia found it almost unbelievable that even Dennis had gone through a cocky phase, though he could understand why. After all, Dennis had reached level 99 so young, just one step away from the limit. At the time, Dennis had been sure he'd soon hit level 100, which was why he left the Black's restaurant to work in different kitchens, all so he could brag about it to his foster mother. Then, one day, he joined Silver Wing, the place he stayed the longest, and despite everything, he had to admit he'd received a lot of help from those people. But the plain truth was that Dennis never did reach level 100. Meanwhile, in town, two of the restaurant's most loyal customers were on their way to the adventurer's restaurant, debating which dish to order today. But to their surprise, they were greeted by a sign. The place was closed for business reasons. At that moment, a pair of men walked past them. One of them shoved the girl in front. Her friend turned to demand an explanation, but the guy simply flashed a knife and walked off with swagger. Not about to let that slide, the sorceress summoned the Guardian of Dawn and fired a magic arrow straight into the thug's backside. As he stumbled to his feet, her partner followed up with the Pit of Ramen spell, striking his accomplice. Suddenly, flames erupted from the alley where the men had come from, right beside the restaurant. By then, Dennis and the kids were on their way back, more than satisfied from the feast. Dennis himself had drunk so much that a young mage, barely a tenth of his weight, had to help carry him along. From a distance, they saw the fire raging near the restaurant, and Dennis bolted ahead, heart pounding, unable to believe what might have happened to his beloved place. When he arrived, the worst lay before his eyes. The adventurer's restaurant engulfed in flames, collapsing piece by piece. Desperate, the chef looked around for a way to fight the fire, while the two young mages pinned down the culprits and identified them as the ones responsible. Vivia recognized them as members of the Night Mist troupe. One of them shouted that Dennis and his crew had this coming for acting so high and mighty. The other added that Night Mist wasn't alone. Silver Wing and the Workstatt House were standing with them, all ready to crush the restaurant's chef. Later, Dennis stood in silence, head lowered, staring at the ashes of the place he loved. Memories of every joyful moment he had lived there came rushing back, each one bittersweet. As the cruel truth sank in, it was all gone. Even the rare books Aetlier had inherited from her family were reduced to dust. Henrietta broke down in tears at such malice, while Vivia blamed himself for the tragedy. If Dennis hadn't saved him, the Night Mist troupe wouldn't have come after him. Bockel felt guilty too, certain that she was the reason their captain had set his sights on the chef. But Dennis told them they bore no blame at all. Honestly, he hadn't expected Silver Wing to be part of this. He believed Joseph Workstatt must have sought out Vigo to form the alliance, with the Night Mist troupe simply hired to do the dirty work like setting the fire. Given everything, Dennis took full responsibility, admitting that maybe he had been arrogant, thinking he could just brush off enemies this dangerous. Vivia tried to lift his spirits, insisting that together they could take these people down, since Dennis had always faced problems head-on. But Dennis seemed weary of more battles. He told them he'd rather open a small restaurant in another town. After all, no one had been hurt, so in the end, he didn't see it as a catastrophe. Henrietta couldn't believe he was backing down like this and urged them to go after the criminals. The chef, baffled, wondered how these kids could possibly think he was Superman, especially now, after losing everything. Truthfully, he once thought he was strong enough to tank a fight like this. But look where that had led. The kingdom's highest noble had teamed up with the most powerful adventurers, and they had muscle to spare. In short, there was no way to take these people on. With a forced smile, Dennis ended the conversation, leaving the kids in shock. Still unwilling to give up, Vivia pressed him. Why was the chef acting so unlike himself? The Dennis he knew would take on the whole kingdom if it meant protecting Aetlier. Calmly, the man replied that he'd simply cooled his head. Then he vanished into the night with Aetlier, leaving Vivia shouting after him, restrained by his friends. As he climbed to the second floor, Dennis took comfort in the fact that at least the safe had survived the fire, still holding the bag of money inside. Aetlier asked if his foster father was really going to accept this, and knowing exactly what she meant, he answered that it was the best thing to do. Every action carries a consequence, and if he chose to fight back, an even harsher reaction would follow, one that could very well lead to someone's death. With that said, Dennis repeated that all he wanted now was to leave. Outside the restaurant, Vivia, Henrietta, and Bacchel stood before the charred remains of their favorite place, unable to accept its end. That's when a few suspicious-looking men began to approach the trio. Aetlier then asked if she could follow Dennis on his new journey. He seemed surprised by the question at this point. The answer was obvious. He reminded her that Joseph had come after him only because he tried to interfere with his plans in court, which meant the chef owed her an apology for her books being burned. But Aetlier assured him it was fine. All she ever wanted was to please the customers. What she couldn't stand was seeing the chef sad. Dennis explained that sometimes sadness was unavoidable. Then, looking out, he remarked that this city truly was a good place. Aetlier smiled in agreement and added that she liked it better than the royal capital. The two touched fists in a gesture of affection and camaraderie. Dennis promised that one day, when things had settled down, they would come back, and the girl thought that was a wonderful idea. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.